On June 26, 2021, I published a little video about Afton, or Scraptrap as most people call him. It was just a project I put together in a few days because I was wanting to do a video about the character for a while. I didn't expect much from it. About 4 years has passed, and I highly doubted anyone still cared about this iteration of Scraptrap, given the whole controversy around his existence was resolved by the original version returning for every FNAF game after Pizzeria Simulator. Boy, was I wrong! That video had a lot of things I didn't cover well, points that completely slipped my mind at the time, awkward organization and attempts at comedy I think confused people on what my actual thoughts on them were, bad commentary I recorded at like 3 AM with no water, and, worst of all, I don't really like how the redesign turned out. So, let's do it right this time. This is Afton, otherwise known as Scraptrap. His design is the most infamous one in Five Nights at Freddy's, and for good reason. Look at him. If you aren't funny, you could even make a joke about Peanuts or Jimmy Neutron right now. Now, before you raise your pitchforks over me daring to rag on the work of the absolute saint that is Scott Cawthon. 1. He's made a ton of banger designs in FNAF, and in older projects like The Desolate Hope, his skills really shine. He's good at what he does, and I do not think he loses sleep over someone saying this funny rabbit man looks stupid. Having said that, this funny rabbit man looks stupid. But not always. I'll talk about some of Scraptrap's strong suits first. His model works really well in the lighting of the salvage room in Pizzeria Simulator. It also holds up pretty good in the ending cutscene where he's set on fire. His design, at least to me, seems to be an effort to turn the very mechanical and bulky Springtrap into a much more organic and battered character. His mask style takes more after traditional Bonnie designs rather than the unique approach Springtrap took, which I don't mind that. Now, where does he fail? Well, you could look at him. His biggest problem in my eyes is his proportions. His head is too big and his ears are too small, which leads to him looking comical when that could have been avoided by some rescaling. There's an edit that popped up a while back that scaled down his head, which made a significant difference, and I feel that solves his biggest problem. Granted, you know his other problems that lie within the finer details. His eyes are dull and dopey, his suit's withering and blocky, his skeleton is about as anatomically incorrect as you can get, his skull looks like the Blender Monkey. Bone ears. However, these finer details aren't really that consequential. I played these up too much in the original video, but I feel if just one of his main problems was fixed, these others wouldn't be noticed nearly as much as they wound up being. If you don't like something, it's much easier to scrutinize random details you wouldn't care about otherwise, and that's exactly what happened with Scraptrap, at least for me. Another important thing to note as to why he was criticized as much as he was, is the context of Pizzeria Simulator's release. Most FNAF fans, myself included, had expectations high for the inevitable 6th game in the series, and that included the return of Springtrap. In my mind, he would simply return as an altered version of Dark Springtrap that made minor adjustments to make him stand out from the original. Obviously, this did not happen, and as Pizzeria Simulator ended, it seemed like that was the one time Springtrap would get to return, and that opportunity felt wasted due to Scraptrap being such a downgrade. If we knew that this was just a one-time deal then, and that the original Springtrap would get to come back later on, I think it would have stung far less than it did. Though, weirdly enough, I still see people treat Scraptrap as if he replaced Springtrap forever, and that they miss the original. Like, bro, he's right there in 2 games and a bad spinning simulator. Regardless, there's obviously another factor to Scraptrap that's often criticized, which, of course, is how he could possibly look the way he does canonically. First off, the corpse looks completely different. How? Did he grow his bones back? The answer is no. Something about both Springtrap and Scraptrap's design is that the details of William Afton's corpse inside them are only shown to so much detail, so it's not really necessary to put stuff there that doesn't need to be. In Springtrap's case, he had his endoskeleton and some basic flesh to give off the idea of his body being mangled in a Springlock suit, without going to unnecessary lengths to do so. This also is likely a result of Scott not being great at modeling humans, since we do get to see Springtrap with a more realistic body in the Twisted Ones graphic novel. Scraptrap, from what I feel, is intended to be William Afton taking advantage of a more free form after getting himself out of the previous suit. This idea mainly comes from the character's name being simply William Afton in the credits. Also, at the time, the character only spoke with this design, so it seemed like Scraptrap was capable of speech while Springtrap wasn't. However, Special Delivery throws a wrench into that idea, since Springtrap speaks with the same voice as Scraptrap. Take that as you will. Regardless, his corpse is prioritized in this design instead of an animatronic endoskeleton, so there is far more complexity to it than the spaghetti guts Springtrap had. Back to the idea that it's inconsistent, it is, but canonically I don't think it means anything, and it has no reason to. The question I've seen raised most often about the idea of him switching suits is how he could even escape the spring locks. Isn't he permanently trapped? Well, no. The FNAF novels, while being in an alternate timeline, give some insight as to how things function in the overall universe, and William Afton managed to escape a springlock endoskeleton twice. Once, he survived and was just left scarred. The other, he surgically removed himself from the endoskeleton after being springtrapped for a year. Given that Scott wrote the fourth closet at the same time he developed Pizzeria Simulator, I think that idea of William abandoning his mantle as Springtrap seeped into the games as well as Scott could carry it over, given his modeling limitations. As for how William escaped the suit in the game's timeline, there's no solid answer, and I honestly don't think Scott ever thought of one. He's the only scrap animatronic not to have some sort of explanation to his design change, but given how the others are, I think he just assumed people could fill in the blanks fairly easily. The assumption I and most others go with is that Springtrap found an old Spring Bonnie suit at an abandoned location, did some switcheroo shenanigans, and made its debut as a different looking green rabbit. I will say that the people who think it's the same suit but shrunk or damaged from the fire, Dark Springtrap is right there, I saw him. Ultimately, though, this change doesn't really matter, and it's just tradition in this series. Up until Pizzeria Simulator, Scott only ever directly reused character models once, being the FNAF 1 characters in FNAF 2's cutscenes. The closest things to reuse were the Phantoms in FNAF 3, and Dark Springtrap in the Sister Location Custom Night cutscene, albeit those were edited models. Any main antagonists use new designs made for their respective games. The Withered animatronics do the same thing as Scraptrap, where they're totally different looking characters from the classics in FNAF 1, but are supposed to be the same animatronics canonically. There's not a problem with this at all, and it leads to some fun designs. After all, the Withers are some of the best characters in the series. Scraptrap just missed the mark so hard for so many people that it was far easier to complain about his inconsistencies because of it. Also, let me just get this out of the way again, since somehow people didn't catch this in the original video. Springtrap and Scraptrap are both William Afton. Michael was never Springtrap. Scott Cawthon has directly stated this. Springtrap and Scraptrap have the same vocal performance by PJ Haywood, who also voices Michael with a completely different performance. I don't think I need to explain this more than I already have. Anyway, now that I've covered everything important about Scraptrap's existing design, let's talk redesigns. Obviously, the most common redesigns of Scraptrap tend to just be variants of Dark Springtrap from Sister Location. It's easy, it looks good, and it's a tried and true design. Then there's redesigns that go in the opposite direction and do some wilder stuff with the character. This can lead to some cool stuff. However, the design approach I prefer the most here is something faithful to the current design while making the effort to improve its problems and enhance its strengths. My previous redesign had that idea in mind. I think it gets the idea across fine enough, but it's got plenty of issues that lots of people pointed out. So, I've completely redone it to fix all of my problems with it. Here it is. Look at it. It mostly retains the idea I had with the original, but it does tweak a lot of things. His withering is no longer blocky and is instead more smooth and uneven. I want this to look more like torn apart and banked up fabric. With Scraptrap's eyelids always being uneven, I wanted to just take out an eye entirely to make that make more sense while retaining the same eye Springtrap had. This helps solidify this being the same person in the suit, and also just retains one of the most recognizable aspects of Springtrap. Additionally, he has a heart-shaped hole in his chest. It's a little touch because I think it looks cool. I lengthened his broken arm bone to emphasize it more because despite it being one of my favorite aspects of the original Scraptrap model, it's just really tiny for no good reason. And finally, a more mummified looking head to help make it clear it's not a regular skull, but rather discolored skin. A specific problem with the original redesign was just this dumb oversight where I made his pelvis way too small. So, I fixed that here. Another problem with the old one is that in trying to preserve the idea of him escaping the endoskeleton, he has nothing to keep him from just crumbling instantly. So, to fix that problem while trying to retain the same idea, I have endoskeleton pieces from Springtrap incorporated here to convey the idea that Afton tried to escape the Springlock suit, but couldn't get out completely. For the parts of him that did get freed of the endoskeleton, I have wires wrapped around them at the joints to hold them together, since otherwise they'd have nothing to stay in place. Some smaller details I added to this are his bottom teeth being crooked and varied in sharpness. I wanted it to look like his teeth were originally rounded, something like Withered Bonnie's, and they just wore down over time or got deliberately sharpened after Afton began using the suit. I also have wires poking out of his head where they were in the original Springtrap. His color palette is darker than my original redesign, and it's also more desaturated compared to the original Scraptrap. Overall, I consider this superior to my first redesign in every possible way, and I think this fixes every problem I have with the official Scraptrap. Keep in mind, I don't think this is perfect, and I imagine people will be able to point out issues with this one just like the previous iteration, but as an overall proof of concept, I think I've nailed down just about everything I can, and I'm much happier with this version than the old one. Now, do I want the actual Scraptrap replaced with something like this? I'm kinda mixed on that. I'd rather see the original model preserved for another game at least, since we've gotten so little material of it. But I also can't say I wouldn't be ecstatic if he came back with an official glow-up. At the very least, I want Skycoth or MapPat to just release the HD full-body render of Scraptrap that is literally right there and exists. How hard is it to upload a PNG? I am still livid to this day. I don't think I'll ever get over it. Is it petty? Absolutely. Do I care? Not at all. I also still want to see Scraptrap get some actual merchandise. Granted, I'd like for it to be good, or for any FNAF merch to be good, really. That's another topic for another day. But regardless, please let me spend money on Scraptrap. I'm desperate at this point. Anyway, last thing is, I think it's really cool how my first Scraptrap redesign, despite its flaws, inspired a lot of people to make their own takes on him, and some people even went out of their way to model my design. It's really cool, even though this kind of attention overwhelmed me a lot. Regardless, I hope my new version of the redesign has a similar effect on people. It's always nice to see some much needed appreciation for our dear Scraptrap. How do I do an always come back joke for this one?